Now, United Bank for Africa is targeting infrastructure financing on the continent as one of its growth areas and recently attended a public-private partnership Africa conference in Tunis, Tunisia, in collaboration with the African Development Bank. Now, let's go live to Lagos, Nigeria, where Wale Shonibare, Director Infrastructure Finance at UBA Capital, joins us now. Now, Wale, did you manage to tie up any deals in Tunis?
Well, we were in discussion about a number of different deals. The good thing about the infrastructure finance conference was that it attracted a cross-section of people from across Africa and also Europe and Asia. So there's a significant amount of interest in investing in African infrastructure. But UBA has had quite a history of collaboration with the African Development Bank over the years in spurring economic development across Africa. And in fact, this July, a facility was approved by the ADCB Bank, by the AFD, African Development Bank board, for an infrastructure and trade finance facility, $150 million US facility for UBA to support its operations across Africa.
Sure. Now let's talk about where the opportunities are in terms of sectors. Now we've seen the road model work extremely well here in South Africa. I mean, we have fantastic roads and infrastructure that works extremely well. Where do you see those opportunities in the rest of the continent?
Yeah, I think obviously we've all seen the examples of telecoms, but there's a significant opportunity in power. In Nigeria, for instance, that's a key sector in which then requires significant investment. After power, you have transportation, roads and light rail. We're seeing deals across Africa in those sectors, and also water is a critical section. So I think across the board, there's significant amount of opportunity right now.
Yeah, I suppose we know, given the poor state of African infrastructure, the opportunities are there. But in which regions do you see perhaps the most opportunities being available?
Right, well, we can start right here in Nigeria. I think given the government's Vision 2020 to become one of the top 20 economies in the world, there's a blueprint to try and invest in significant sectors, infrastructure sectors, to achieve this goal. So roads are certainly an area. Government has announced concessioning of some major airports. We're also looking at railway concessioning. But when we look across West Africa, in Ghana, the government is looking at doing toll roads. They're also looking at getting private sector involvement in the rail sector. In Cameroon, we've seen activity in the power sector. In Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal, they've concessioned out ports. So in Kenya, the government has been successful in launching an infrastructure bond. I think it was $500 million. So across the board, governments are getting their act together and trying to channel both public and private sector funding into infrastructure.
Let's talk about monies here. Let's talk the numbers. Now, we know, of course, funding remains a huge problem for many African governments and countries. Now, where do you see a willingness on the part of the governments to actually put up money to help companies realize those opportunities? And who is there to help them raise the money?
Right. I think in terms of raising financing for the infrastructure, it's long-term funding, and that's why it's so difficult, has been traditionally difficult in many African countries because the conditions were not right. But thankfully, over the past 10 or so years of political and economic reform in Africa, where many governments have reduced significantly their sovereign debt positions and introduced things like pension fund reforms and capital market reforms, we are now seeing the conditions to allow long-term financing to be raised both locally and internationally.